Good day to you all, and a sincere welcome to the Iraqi Dinar Hub. It is with a profound sense of significance that I greet you at this particular juncture. For the conversation we are embarking upon today transcends the routine nature of a standard news update. We find ourselves in one of those rare periods where the very atmosphere within this community and the surrounding informational landscape feels palpably shifted, charged with a different quality of energy. For those of you who have dedicated considerable time to following the intricate narrative of the Iraqi dinar, you possess an intuitive understanding of precisely what I mean by this shift. Over the years, you have cultivated a discerning sense that allows you to differentiate between the constant background chatter of speculation and the emergence of tangible, consequential movement. This distinction manifests not in grand pronouncements, but in the subtle undertones of professional discourse, the demonstrable credibility of emerging data, and the observable, preparatory actions being undertaken by formidable financial institutions whose movements are never casual. Our focus today will be an intensive exploration of breaking developments concerning the IQD, with specific attention to the compelling rationale behind why major international banking entities appear to be orchestrating their operational stances in advance of a timeline that many within our community had anticipated, particularly surrounding the symbolic window of a Sunday. However, before we proceed to dissect these developments, I must emphasize a crucial prerequisite for our dialogue. I need you to consciously pause and center yourself. This is not a moment that calls for hastiness or alarm. Rather, it is a moment that demands lucid thought and comprehensive understanding. From the very outset, I must be unequivocally clear on a point of paramount importance. Nothing conveyed in this discussion is intended to serve as financial guidance of any kind. I am not acting as your financial advisor, nor am I advocating for any specific course of action, be it purchasing, selling, exchanging, or any related financial decision. My role here is strictly defined as that of an information analyst and pattern observer. I aim to share verified data, interpret observable trends, and provide a structured perspective, all with the goal of empowering you to engage in critical thinking and arrive at independently informed decisions that align with your personal circumstances. This foundation is built on transparency. There are no implicit promises, no absolute guarantees. Only a commitment to a sober and factual examination of events that seem to be progressing in real time. To fully appreciate the weight of the current situation, we must first engage in an honest reflection on the collective journey that has brought us to this point. For many years, the community surrounding the Iraqi dinar has been inundated with a relentless stream of specific date Sundays, Mondays, holidays, and various other arbitrary deadlines presented as windows of definitive opportunity. The overwhelming majority of these forecasted moments have passed without yielding any publicly verifiable change or validation, a pattern that has inevitably led to widespread exhaustion. This historical context has fostered a spectrum of understandable reactions, ranging from justifiable anger to deeply ingrained skepticism. Such responses are not only natural, but are illogical, consequence of repeated cycles of raised anticipation and subsequent disappointment. When one has been told dozens of times over an extended period that a transformative event is imminent, the psychological act of constructing emotional armor becomes a necessary defense mechanism. Yet, it is within this very context of seasoned caution that I urge you to consider a crucial distinction about the present moment. What is occurring now is qualitatively different, and this difference is not rooted in the selection of another arbitrary date on the calendar. The difference is fundamentally rooted in observable behavior, specifically the behavior of major financial institutions. In the intricate and high-stakes arena of global finance, the actions and preparations of these entities often reveal underlying truths long before any official announcements are crafted for public consumption. Presently, we are witnessing concrete, discernible signs that these banking giants are actively positioning their operational frameworks ahead of what the broader community consensus had pegged as the expected timeline. This type of institutional behavior carries immense significance, far more than casual observers might realize. Banks do not undertake complex operational repositioning, system adjustments, staffing reallocations, or enhanced readiness protocols on a whim or in response to internet-fueled rumors. These institutions are, by their very nature, unemotional entities driven by risk assessment and strategic planning. They do not chase speculative trends or become entangled in community hype. What they do, with meticulous precision, is prepare for potential outcomes they have deemed sufficiently probable to justify the allocation of significant resources. Therefore, when multiple major banks initiate preparatory movements ahead of the public's anticipated schedule, it typically signals one very specific reality. They are striving to avoid being caught in a position of unreadiness. They are positioning themselves to be proactive and prepared, rather than reactive and scrambling, in the interest of maintaining absolute clarity and preventing any potential misinterpretation. I must be exceedingly careful with my language, as precision is paramount, especially when discussions can evoke high emotions. To state that banks are moving ahead of a timeline does not equate to a conclusion that all events have already transpired in secret, nor does it mean that a revaluation has been publicly announced and missed by the community. It certainly does not constitute a recommendation to immediately proceed to your local bank branch. What it accurately denotes is that their internal processes for operational readiness appear to be accelerating at a pace that outruns the timeline, as previously discussed in public forums. This is a critical and nuanced distinction that must be internalized. The vast majority of individuals interact only with the public-facing facade of the financial world, the official press releases, the rates displayed at exchange bureaus, the headlines in financial news. However, long before any of these public signals become visible, there exists an entire, often silent, internal ecosystem where core systems undergo rigorous stress testing. Transactional permissions and authorities are methodically adjusted. Compliance and regulatory protocols are meticulously reviewed, and operational workflows are refined for efficiency. It is within this hidden technical stratum that major banks conduct their essential operations daily. According to reports from credible sources with insight into these layers, it is precisely within this operational domain that noticeable movement is currently being observed by those trained to identify such preparatory indicators. It is worthwhile to briefly revisit the origins of why Sunday time became such an entrenched focal point within this community, as understanding this history helps clarify the significance of a deviation. In global finance, weekends hold particular operational importance because they provide a natural lull in active trading and public transaction volume. This closure offers an ideal technical window for implementing major system updates, international settlement transitions, or policy changes with minimal disruptive impact on live markets. Consequently, over time, a logical assumption crystallized within the dinar community: if a significant monetary event were to occur, it would most plausibly be orchestrated to go live over a weekend, often pinpointed to a Sunday. This reasoning is not without merit, as history contains numerous examples of consequential currency adjustments and financial restructurings that were deployed during weekend windows. However, the essential point to grasp is that this pattern represents a strong preference based on operational convenience, not an inviolable rule written in stone. Preferences, however, are inherently flexible and can be overridden when the assessment of urgency changes. When banking institutions determine that waiting for the theoretically perfect calendar moment might expose them to operational risk or place them at a competitive disadvantage, they will act earlier. They do not rigidly await a specific Sunday if the prevailing conditions and risk models suggest that earlier preparation is a strategic necessity. It is this dynamic, the bending of traditional timing, preferences in response to perceived urgency, that makes the current observations so profoundly noteworthy and worthy of your focused attention. Furthermore, we must address the pervasive ambiguity surrounding the very term RV or revaluation, as it is used with frustrating looseness across the internet. For some individuals, RV conjures an image of a dramatic, overnight public rate change, where one awakens to discover the dinar's value has multiplied exponentially. For others, it signifies a more gradual, multi-stage process of normalization in alignment with fundamental value. For still others, particularly within institutional contexts. RV may refer primarily to internal changes in valuation methodology, or more operationally, to the state of readiness required to handle a potential change, a concept entirely separate from the public announcement of that change itself. Therefore, when we analyze reports of banks moving ahead of schedule, we are predominantly discussing this latter concept, readiness and preparation. This focus, while perhaps less thrilling than visions of instant wealth, is arguably a more positive and sustainable indicator. Genuine, stable financial transitions are invariably built upon foundations of meticulous preparation and robust system integrity, not upon theatrical public declarations. To maintain a balanced perspective, we must periodically redirect our analytical focus to the source of this entire narrative, Iraq itself. The nation has spent the better part of the last decade engaged in a systematic, often quiet, project of rebuilding its financial infrastructure from the ground up. This effort extends far beyond superficial updates. It encompasses fundamental banking sector reforms, enhanced compliance with demanding international standards like anti-money laundering, AML, and counterfinancing of terrorism, CFT, concerted drives toward greater financial transparency, the development of modern digital payment infrastructure, and strategic alignment with global financial communication protocols such as SWIFT. These structural and technical steps, documented by international bodies like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, represent tangible, measurable progress that creates the essential foundation for lasting currency stability and credible value. This methodical internal advancement has continued steadily, even as online discourse remained mired in debates over specific dates and fictional rates. When you synthesize Iraq's documented internal progress with the current state of a global financial system, experiencing significant stress from persistent inflation, unprecedented debt levels, geopolitical fragmentation, and shifting reserve currency dynamics, an intriguing picture emerges. Economies that are resource-rich, demonstrably reforming, moving towards stability begin to appear increasingly attractive to international capital and institutional investors. While not without challenges, Iraq now fits this profile more convincingly than it has at any point in the last 20 years. Major global banks with their vast research departments are acutely aware of these macro trends. They analyze them, model potential scenarios, and, most importantly, adjust their operational postures in response to their conclusions. This leads us to another cornerstone of modern banking: institutional risk management. Major financial institutions operate with an almost obsessive aversion to being unprepared for market-moving events. If their models indicate even a reasonable probability of a shift in currency, conditions especially for a currency that has been the subject of long-term speculation and holds strategic importance, they will initiate preparatory protocols well in advance. They do not wait for absolute, incontrovertible certainty, as such certainty in finance is virtually non-existent before an official announcement. Instead, they prepare based on assessed probabilities. The cumulative weight of evidence reforms, global economic shifts, and technical indicators suggest that the probability of meaningful change related to the Iraqi dinar is higher now than it has been for a considerable. This elevated probability assessment is the most plausible explanation for the observable movements and the discussions of timelines being accelerated. It is not a matter of protocols being broken, but rather of protocols being activated in response to a changed assessment of the underlying environment. I wish to speak directly and with empathy to those of you who have been holders of dinar for many years, perhaps even over a decade. This message is particularly for you. You have navigated a landscape filled with grand claims, and have likely experienced the sting of disappointment on multiple occasions. Therefore, your instinctive reaction to this update might be a dismissive sigh, categorizing it as merely more of the same noise you have learned to filter out. I hold a deep respect for that protective skepticism, as it is a hard-earned tool. However, I must caution you against allowing healthy skepticism to morph into willful blindness. Authentic skepticism is an active, intelligent process. It asks probing questions, demands verifiable evidence, and maintains high standards for credibility. Blindness, in contrast, is a passive rejection that ignores legitimate signals simply because previous signals proved false. The activity characterizing the current environment is not loud, boastful, or dramatic. It is subtle, technical, and procedural. In the world of high finance, genuinely significant developments almost invariably begin in this subdued technical manner. The conspicuous public-facing moments arrive later, only after the necessary groundwork has been laid quietly and thoroughly behind the scenes, a critical and common error made by observers of currency. Stories is the assumption that if a development is not immediately visible in public forums or on public-facing rate boards, then no development is occurring at all. This assumption is profoundly mistaken in the context of institutional finance. By the time the general public sees an official announcement, rate change, or policy shift, that event is already old news within the internal corridors of banks and regulatory bodies. It has been the subject of extensive discussion, scenario modeling, operational preparation, and phased implementation over preceding weeks or months. Thus, when knowledgeable sources indicate that banks are moving early, they are communicating that these internal preparatory processes have become visibly active to those with insight. In the banking world, this visibility is incredibly meaningful, as it reflects concrete resource allocation, a step institutions take only when their risk-reward analysis justifies the investment. We cannot proceed without directly addressing the potent role of fear. As I perceive its presence in the community's response, fear propagates with alarming speed during periods of uncertainty. Some individuals fear missing a life-altering opportunity, FOMO. Others are terrified of making a catastrophic financial misstep. And many are deeply afraid to permit hope to resurface, guarded against the acute pain of past disappointments. Every one of these fears is a valid human emotion. However, it is imperative to understand that fear must never be the engine driving your financial decisions. If a financial event is genuine, systemic, and legitimate, it will not necessitate panic or rushed, ill-considered actions. No authentic monetary transition that affects millions of global citizens is designed to trick them, force hasty decisions, or punish those who take prudent time for consideration. Such an approach would instantly obliterate the trust that is the bedrock of any currency's value. Therefore, if you encounter messages or sources that actively breed artificial urgency while failing to provide substantive clarity, consider that you're cued to disengage, slow down, and recalibrate. Authentic financial progress reveals itself over time through a consistent accumulation of evidence and logical progression. It does not scream for attention. It methodically unfolds. Another layer of nuance essential for a complete understanding is that the global banking sector is not a monolithic entity that moves in perfect unison. Different institutions have varying cultures, risk appetites, and strategic approaches. Some are agile and proactive, willing to position themselves early based on forward-looking analysis. Others are inherently more conservative, preferring to wait for multiple confirmations or to observe the actions of peer institutions before committing resources. Consequently, reports of major banks moving do not imply that every single branch worldwide is synchronously executing the same script. It signifies that decision-makers at significant, often systemically important institutions have authorized and are overseeing an acceleration of internal readiness processes within their core operational and treasury functions. This adjustment phase is typically conducted out of public view until it reaches a scale that becomes difficult to entirely conceal. Let us once more re-examine the Sunday timeline concept, as it remains a source of confusion. The anticipation of a Sunday event was always a deduction based on operational best practices, not a received revelation. Because it is a preference rather than a mandate, the relevant actors are not bound to it. What holds infinitely more weight than the day of the week is the actual, measurable readiness state of the involved systems and institutions. Current reporting suggests that this state of readiness is undergoing a measurable and notable increase. At this juncture, I must inject a vital note of practical caution. As clarity is the ultimate protection against error, the observation that banks may be advancing their preparatory timeline does not translate into a directive for you. as an individual to take immediate action. For the overwhelming majority of people following this story, the correct and prudent response at this stage is deliberate non-action, coupled with heightened, discerning awareness. Your task is to observe developments calmly. Listen to sources with a proven track record of accuracy. Keep your relevant documentation secure and organized. And, above all, strive to maintain emotional equilibrium. That is the complete and appropriate posture. If you ever feel an external or internal pressure compelling you to rush into a decision, recognize that feeling itself as a warning signal to pause and thoroughly reassess the situation. Legitimate financial opportunities, by their very nature, afford participants adequate time for thoughtful consideration and response. It is also crucial to factor in the accelerated pace of contemporary global finance. Advanced digital platforms, real-time gross settlement systems, and deeply interconnected global markets mean that once pivotal decisions are ratified at high levels, the downstream implementation can occur with remarkable speed. This modern reality is precisely why early and thorough preparation is so zealously prioritized by major institutions. Their preparatory movements are a direct reflection of this need to be positioned for swift execution. Again, preparation is not synonymous with completion, but it is an undeniable signal of serious intent and a materially heightened assessment of probability factors that carry immense weight in the analytical framework of finance. The issue of trust, undoubtedly eroded over years within this space, must also be confronted. This erosion stems not solely from the complexities of Iraq's journey, but from a deluge of misinformation, chronic exaggeration, fantastical predictions, and sources that prioritized audience engagement metrics over factual integrity. Rebuilding trust is a gradual process requiring consistent, demonstrable honesty. A key component of this rebuilding is a steadfast commitment to distinguishing between what is known with confidence and what remains uncertain. We can state with confidence that Iraq has achieved documented, verifiable progress in financial reform. We know global economic conditions are in flux. We know banks are sensitive to timing and risk. We know internal movement precedes public events. What we cannot know with certainty are the precise details of dates, final exchange rates, or the exact form of public outcomes. Any source claiming absolute certainty on these specifics is not operating from a place of integrity. Yet this inherent uncertainty does not negate the reality of ongoing activity. It simply confirms we are situated within a dynamic transition phase. Transitions are inherently ambiguous and nonlinear, but they are also the exclusive domain where substantive change is forged. Let us reflect on the virtue of patience, a quality often mischaracterized in environments of prolonged anticipation. Patience, in this context, is not passive resignation or disengagement. True patience is an active state of sustained readiness that consciously rejects panic. It is the capacity to hold a strategic awareness without descending into counterproductive obsession. It is trust in your own cultivated ability to recognize a legitimate shift and respond to it appropriately when the moment truly arrives. If you have persevered through the myriad ups and downs of the dinar narrative thus far, you have already demonstrated profound patience. Do not abandon this hard-won strength now, precisely as the landscape begins to show signs of authentic motion. Maintain your disciplined course. Finally, consider the nature of institutional communication. Banks maintain a stark dichotomy between internal and external messaging. Internal communication is technical, precise, guarded, and focused on operational logistics. Public communication is delayed, sanitized, legally vetted, and simplified for mass consumption. What is beginning to occur now, it appears, is a seepage of indicators from that internal, operational layer into broader awareness. This is not about the leak of classified secrets, but rather that the scale and scope of readiness activities are reaching a point where they become increasingly difficult to fully obscure from knowledgeable observers. This seepage is a key contributor to the palpable shift in the environment's feel. Asterisk in closing. I remind you of the foundational premise that sometimes becomes obscured in daily speculation, the Iraqi Dinar story. At its core, was never about a single magical moment. It has always been the story of a nation undertaking the arduous, long-term project of reconstructing its economy and financial systems after decades of trauma, with the goal of reintegrating into the global order as a credible, stable participant. Such a process is measured in years and decades, requiring relentless effort, investment, and reform. When such a process nears its critical inflection point, momentum can indeed increase. But it does so within the guardrails of procedure and systemic stability. We may well be closer to that inflection point than ever before. This does not guarantee a specific tomorrow, but it strongly indicates that the underlying environment is undergoing a significant shift. And in finance, as in nature, the environment always dictates the outcome. It creates the necessary conditions, and the visible results inevitably follow. My sincere gratitude extends to you for investing the time and attention to engage with this detailed analysis. This subject deserves nothing less than calm analysis, thoughtful consideration, and clear-eyed awareness, not hype, chaos, or fear. If you found value in this comprehensive discussion, your support for the Iraqi Dinar Hub channel in whatever form you choose is appreciated. More importantly, take care of your well-being. Guard your peace of mind. Remain anchored in verifiable reality. We are not in a moment that demands panic. We are in a moment that rewards preparation, clarity, and steadiness. And in such moments, it is the calm, observant, and prepared individual who is ultimately rewarded. Thank you for your commitment to this journey, approached with seriousness and integrity. I look forward to reconvening with you in the next update. Until then, stay informed, stay balanced, and stay ready.